Ted, Donald
Yes.
Trump said that he would give the country a pep talk. The question was, if you were president today, what would you do about Brussels? And he said he would give the country a pep talk. If you were the president, what would you do today after Brussels?
Well, we don't need a pep talk. What we need is serious leadership that keeps us safe. And the first thing, obviously, that all of us are doing is we're lifting up in prayer the families of those who were murdered, those who were injured, and including especially several Mormon missionaries from Utah who were among those injured, and our prayers are with them and their families and with everyone who were the victims of this terror attack. But what is most important is that we need a commander-in-chief who will recognize the evil we face, which is radical Islamic terrorism, who will call it by its name, which President Obama refuses to do, and who will unleash the full force and fury of the United States to utterly destroy and defeat radical Islamic terrorism and to utterly destroy and defeat ISIS. That is not happening now because President Obama's fealty to political correctness. And until we defeat ISIS, these attacks will continue in Europe, they will continue in America, because this is the face of evil, and they have declared jihad on Europe and America, and we need a commander-in-chief who will keep us safe.
Okay, so a lot of people will understand what Donald Trump said about Brussels when he called it a hellhole, because what he was saying was they're so politically correct. These immigrants have come in and made it absolutely unlivable. That's not helpful to say. That's not what an ally says. But how do you get Europe and America to get out of this politically correct nonsense that we can just bring people in who don't have the same kind of life, don't want to have the same kind of life, and fix this?
Well, sadly, this attack is in many ways the fruit of failed immigration policies in Europe over decades that have allowed vast numbers of radical Islamic terrorists to infiltrate Europe and to endeavor to destroy Europe from within. And it has been tragic and catastrophic. But it also poses an ongoing threat not only to Europe but to America. And one of the things we need to do in the wake of these attacks is re-examine the visa waiver program. The visa waiver program, which allows people from Europe to come to America with minimal screening, was designed in an era where we didn't believe we had substantial national security threats coming from our friends and allies. Given the decisions of Europe to allow so many radical Islamic terrorists to come in, we need to revisit that and make sure that every refugee coming to America, every person coming to America is thoroughly vetted so that we are not bringing into this country radical Islamic terrorists who are coming to wage jihad and murder Americans.
Ted, let me ask you this. I have a personal problem. I shouldn't say it's personal because it's not a personal vendetta or anything like that. It is. I've watched Grover Norquist for a long time, and I love his tax plan and everything else. But he is responsible for bringing some very bad actors into the White House under Bush. And the president has even gone further and brought Muslim Brotherhood people into the Department of Homeland Security and into the White House. What are you going to do to get the guys who are the bad Muslims that George Bush and Barack Obama have deemed the right guys and get them out of our government so we can actually stop with the political correctness?
Well, Glenn, we've got to start by defining the enemy, what it is we're fighting, and President Obama and Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party's refusal to acknowledge radical Islamic terrorism is not just a semantic difference. You know, a lot of times reporters say, well, who cares what they call it? It impacts policy decisions on a daily basis, because if you don't define the enemy, then you don't act appropriately to defeat it. So, for example, it informs President Obama's decision to bring tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees to this country because he will not acknowledge that we're fighting radical Islamic terrorism. I believe we should immediately halt that proposal. We shouldn't be bringing refugees in that may be infiltrated by ISIS. Likewise, the San Bernardino terrorist, the female terrorist, posted on social media publicly a call to jihad, and yet the Obama administration refused to look to social media That was because of the political correctness. They thought it would be inappropriate. We need to be looking and identifying radical Islamic terrorists. And you mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization. I've introduced legislation in the Senate to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. They support and fund terrorists who seek to murder Americans, seek to murder Israelis, seek to murder Europeans. And this administration celebrated when Mubarak was toppled and the Muslim Brotherhood took over Egypt. That was a terrible development from U.S. national security interests when the Muslim Brotherhood took over. And it was a far better development, and this administration opposed it, when President al-Sisi took over and threw the Muslim Brotherhood out of power. And we need to acknowledge the threat that the Muslim Brotherhood possesses, and we need to target radical Islamic terrorists wherever it is found, whether it is in the Middle East, whether it is in Europe, or whether it is in America. The top priority of the commander-in-chief should be keeping us safe, and President Obama is failing badly in that task.
Donald Trump, when asked who he listens to about foreign affairs, he said himself, because he's got a brain, quote, quote, a good brain. He has a good brain, end quote. That didn't really sit well with some people. It didn't sit well with us. I saw that you, one of your advisors is Frank Gaffney, who I really respect. But the press hates Frank Gaffney, and so do many in the Republican establishment, because Frank is very, very clear. Why did you pick him, and who else would you listen to on Islamic terror?
Well, Frank is someone I've known for many years, and he has done serious and very good work focusing on the threat of radical Islamic terrorism, focusing on the rise of jihadism and the need to combat against it. And you're right.
I will tell you that that shows that you would be put into an extremist category by this administration by having him.
I don't doubt it, and both the modern Democratic Party and the press react with fear and trepidation at anyone who would call out jihadists for what they are. And I will apologize to no one for the vigor with which I will defend this country and fight against our enemies to keep us safe. And there are a great many others who are advising me, including Andy McCarthy, who is a tremendous expert, and Jim Talent, and we have a great team of advisors. But, you mentioned Donald Trump.
Hang on just a second. These guys are all guys, even at the end, the Bush administration said no. I mean, these are guys that I trust, but these are guys that some of them are the guys that the Bush administration said, oh, that's a little too harsh. We don't want to do that.
Well, and we need a renewed focus on keeping this country safe. And you noted that Trump says he's his own foreign policy advisor. Well, I got to tell you, it shows.
Yes,
just yesterday, Donald Trump called publicly for essentially withdrawing from NATO, for abandoning Europe. It's striking that the day after he does that, we see a terror attack in Brussels, where NATO is headquartered. And Donald's isolationism and weakness is profoundly dangerous. Now, it shouldn't be surprising. I mean, remember, Donald Trump supported Jimmy Carter over Ronald Reagan. Donald Trump supported John Kerry over George W. Bush. Donald Trump contributed twice to Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign and described Hillary Clinton, in his view, as one of the greatest secretaries of state in history.
He said, no. He said in Twitter just the other day that she's the most corrupt person and has been corrupt her whole career.
Yeah. Well, and as you know, Glenn, I responded to that in Twitter and said, really? Well, then, Donald, why were you funding her entire career? Why'd you give $100,000 to the Clinton Foundation? Why did you support her Senate race and her presidential race if she's so corrupt? And, Donald doesn't have a good answer to that. But when it comes to foreign policy, you can see that Donald's foreign policy is guided by his exemplars are Jimmy Carter and John Kerry and Hillary Clinton, the left-wing Democrats that he supported financially for 40 years, withdrawing from NATO, as Donald Trump suggested yesterday, would hand Putin a massive victory. It would hand ISIS a massive victory. ISIS would celebrate. And Donald's view is really the same as the Obama, Clinton, Kerry view that we should, quote, lead from behind, which means retreat from the world, not stand up to our enemies. And I think Donald is wrong that our foreign policy should begin with preemptive surrender and handing victories to Putin and ISIS.
Ted, I've got to run. I've got a network break, but good luck today in Arizona and Utah. We're praying for you, and I thank you very much for all the hard work that you've done.
Thank
God
you.
bless.
God bless, and everyone in Arizona and Utah. Today's election day, so please come out and vote, and let's lift the people up in Brussels in our prayers.